Born in Cleveland, raised a hillbilly. What's your story? Welcome to the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus podcast. Here's your host, Sarah Blossom Ware.
Welcome to the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Blossom Ware. The chapter that I'll read today is called Apes, Out Yonder. Granny's house was our second home, and Granny was, well, our Granny. We ate many meals of brown beans and cornbread at Granny's house. Orange Kool-Aid was also a staple. It had to be orange, because Granny said that all of the other colors cause cancer. The best part of the Kool-Aid was at the bottom, where all the white sugar rested. There was a 55-gallon metal drum near the right side of her house that she called the rain barrel. I saw mosquito larvae on top many times when I peered into the rain barrel. I secretly knew that this was the water that was used to make the Kool-Aid, but I drank it anyway. What are you going to do? Granny read faithfully from her King James Bible every day. It is the only book that I ever saw her read. Granny lived out life with honesty and integrity, and her word was binding. As much as she believed in the ancient written word of God, she did not believe in the scientific discoveries of modern times. Granny tried to set us straight whenever the topics presented themselves. The earth was only a few thousand years old, not millions of years, because God created the earth in 7 days, and the year was only 1980 whatever. There were no such things as dinosaurs, because there was no mention of them in the Bible. The earth was not round but flat. You can look as far as the eye can see, and you will never see a curvature. And of course, men have never gone to the moon. She used to cite as evidence some unknown news broadcast in which 3 men went up in the rocket and 4 came down. Granny was full of interesting idioms, such as, "I'll be swan on to goodness," and my personal favorite, "You could stink a dead dog off a gut wagon." When we got rowdy and restless, she used to lament, "You kids are behaving like a bunch of wild yard apes. Now get out yonder and play." Yonder was anywhere outside, except for sometimes when yonder would be transformed into a very specific yet elusive location. "No, I said out yonder," with the point of a finger. Even though we weren't supervised most of the time when we were outside, we never strayed from Granny's yard. The unspoken boundaries were the driveway and the white pom-pom bush in the far corner of the front yard, and the clothesline and the outhouse in the backyard. We weren't allowed out in the old smokehouse, but every once in a great while we would get brave and sneak inside. The smokehouse was a forbidden wonderland filled with all sorts of stored items, most of them happily dangerous to small children. Corey, Josh, George, and I played endless hours outside. Henry eventually joined in as he got older. Sometimes we would climb the tree in Granny's front yard. Sometimes we would play a game of makeshift baseball in the backyard using a stick for a bat and a rock for a ball. Sometimes we would play Roll the Barrel, in which we would lay an empty 55-gallon drum on its side and then see who could run on it the furthest without falling off. Yet another use for those versatile barrels. I cannot believe I don't currently own one. We even had our own club called the P-Wad Hockey Wad Squad, perhaps to celebrate my newly learned word. By the way, hockey is number 2, as in I have to go hockey. I have no idea why we called it that. We even made up a little song about the P-Wad Hockey Wad Squad. To this day, I'm still a fan of bathroom humor. The only animals that Granny had were chickens in a small coop near the outhouse. Granny gathered their eggs and wrung their necks for food. Granny would take a chicken by the neck and somehow snap and spin it so that the head separated from the body. We would chase the headless chickens as they ran around the yard. Headless chickens can run surprisingly fast and have quite a bit of stamina, and they are impossible to catch because they switch up direction often and without warning. After a few minutes, the bodies would just sort of stop and fall over. Sometimes when Granny was mad at us, she would say, "You kids, I'd like to wring your little necks." We would usually perk up and pay attention to that. Granny would bring the dead chicken into the kitchen and pluck the feathers out, and then chop it up for cooking. As part of the preparation, she would remove developing eggs from the dead chicken's body, claiming that these were good, edible eggs. She would cook these up and then present them in a bowl on the dinner table, along with the cooked chicken meat. I ate them. She was right. Okay, thank you for joining us again for the podcast. We have panel members with us that were new with us last week or last time. So I'll let them go ahead and reintroduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the remainder of the podcast.
So I'm Monica Lee Tischler, born in NYC, lived in Tennessee.
My name is Abdullah Baig, youngest of 3, pursuing an MD.
Okay, so if any of you listeners are interested in more background information on Monica or Abdullah, you can listen into the previous podcast and hear some more about them. So thank you for joining us again. Before we get into the discussion, I would like to go ahead and do a segment that I call, So What Have You Been Busy With Lately? Monica, so what have you been busy with lately?
Well, my secret, besides being a college professor and a mother of 2 daughters who are just about grown, is that I am a certified U.S. figure skating judge. And this past weekend, yesterday, I judged a competition. Last Thursday, so 3 days ago, I judged a test session. And I am busy just about every weekend judging, or even sometimes during the week. So that's my secret life.
That's actually incredible. I don't know what to say to that.
I never had any idea about that.
Wow.
That's my secret life.
I'm in shock right now. I mean, I've had you as a professor for like a few years now, and I had no idea you ever did that on the side.
Well, you've never needed to figure skate, have you?
That is true. At least now I know who to go to.
It actually takes an awful lot of training
Yeah.
and continuing education to be able to do it and to be able to do it properly.
Definitely.
And why is that? Because the rules are always changing? Or the
No, not
moves?
because the rules are always changing, but you really have to pay attention to a lot of detail and a lot of nuance, and looking to make sure that skaters are on the correct edge and that they're doing the moves properly and that everything is scored properly.
How did you get into that?
How did I get into that? I got into it because my daughters were competitive figure skaters. I skated recreationally. I'm almost as bad at skating as I am at singing. But I enjoyed it very much. And as they were getting older and getting out of competitive, my younger daughter had competed for the United States.
Wow.
When she was in high school, synchronized skating. When they were sort of getting ready to leave the competitive realm, I decided I wanted to stay in the sport and give back. So I started training.
That's really interesting.
So you can do everything on the weekends with that? Or?
I sometimes do it during the week also,
Okay.
but being a college professor, I am flexible enough that if I'm not teaching a class, I can rearrange things.
Wow, that's super cool.
I'm still in shock.
I didn't mean to be shocking.
We don't know what to say. That's awesome.
Now my secret's out, I guess. It's not such a secret.
Not a secret anymore.
It was just a need to know thing. Yeah, you didn't need to know it for class. So
Right.
yeah. Okay, awesome. All right, so based on the last chapter, so Yard Apes Out Yonder, the first question that I have to throw out is about Granny. So Granny is this larger-than-life figure in my life and in the lives of a lot of people. So I'm just wondering, do you have some matriarchal figure in your life, or, you know, especially growing up, that was super influential and it is still influential in your life?
Personally, unfortunately, I was never blessed with having grandparents live close to me. My grandma, from my mom's side and my dad's side, live in India, both my grandma's and my grandfather's. My dad's father, he actually passed away when I was very young, so I don't even recall meeting him. And then my mother's parents both passed away when I was like 6, and they were both in India at the same time. So the only one remaining right now is my dad's mother, but she lives all the way in India. So I personally never really had an influential figure like that. And I recall growing up, I always longed for that kind of relationship because all my friends, they had grandparents, and they were like, yeah, we're going to our grandparents' house, or my grandmother just baked me some cookies and things like that. So I would always long for that that feeling and having someone besides your parents to get that love and affection from. So I really didn't have that influential figure, I would say, up until when I started working at a retirement home. And that was kind of cool because I had a lot of grandparents now. Like, I had a lot of influential people and different stories I was able to get from them. So that was definitely like a influential thing where speaking of like grandmother things. So it wasn't like for your case where it was like one person you had telling you all these things. I just had, I guess, many, even though they weren't related to me anyway, but I took care of them, and in a way they took care of me. So I would say that's the only influential person I had growing up besides like my parents, obviously.
How long did you work there?
So I worked at the retirement home for 2 years. I got my CNA, so I was working as a CNA with them for 2 years, and I didn't know how close you could get to someone in 2 years until working there, and it was really tough because it really put reality into perspective because you see people growing up and you don't see that many changes in them as much as you do at that old age where within the 2 years I worked there, I lost so many people. And that's just 2 years, 1 year they're normal, they're living, breathing fine. And then next year they're, on their deathbed and they're just like about to pass away. And that was just, it was just crazy to see how many changes come to your body and to your life just in the span of 2 years. And that was like a humbling experience for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Monica?
Well, I was blessed. I was blessed to have 4 living grandparents until I was in high school. So actually until I was a senior in high school. So I feel incredibly blessed. But the person, and I don't want to say one grandmother or grandfather was favorite over the others, but the person that really loomed large in my life was my father's mother, who was this tiny woman. I think by the time I was 10, I was taller than her. But she was so full of energy and so full of life. And she was very proper. She had an idea of what was right and what was wrong. And yet, as I grew up, I realized that she really was a fun-loving, hard-drinking, hard-partying kind of person, which, of course, you never would have known. Well, here, Grandma, you're dead now. I'm going to tell the story. My husband-to-be and I were staying at her house one Thanksgiving, and she put us in the same bedroom, and we weren't married. So, and my parents had us in different areas of the house. So she was just definitely someone who was hip and with it, shall we say. We were engaged to be married. I'm just letting you know. But at any rate, she just was vivacious and sort of glistened with all sorts of energy. And she was the person who kept us together. Every Thanksgiving of my life that she was alive, we spent at her house. And she actually lived in her house until she was 92 years old. She died at 93. And I would go And as she was getting older, Abdullah, you were talking about seeing people failing. She was still in her house. And as she was getting older, it became very important to her that we would have the Thanksgiving dinner at her house. And so as the only granddaughter, everyone else was grandsons in my generation. As the only granddaughter, my job was to say, "Oh, Grandma, how do you make a turkey?" And then she would tell me how to do it, even though I was an adult, with 2 kids of my own. "Oh, Grandma, those mashed potatoes, how do you do that? Grandma, how do you do this? How do you do that?" Just so that we could keep her with it and involved and active. And I miss her terribly even still. Aww. She was really, it was very important to us to be able to do that for her. But she just was so loving to us as a kid when I would go and stay at her house. Oh, my goodness, she let me bounce on the beds. I mean, first of all, she'd never admit that she would let us bounce on the beds, okay? But she let us bounce on the beds. I mean, I wasn't allowed to bounce on the bed in my house. So she just let us do all sorts of things. It was really very nice.
She was the fun grandma.
She was the fun grandma. The other grandma wasn't as fun. But she was fun in this sort of quiet way because she was definitely someone who was very proper on the outside, and she gave a lot of herself. She never worked a day in her life, and yet she volunteered heavily at the hospital thrift shop with social issues, social services. And so even when she was too old to drive and couldn't drive anymore, she would pay a driver to take her to her volunteer position at the hospital thrift shop before she could no longer do that, because that was always very important to her, giving back to the community.
That's very cool. So how do you guys plan on, when you guys get to the stage in life when you guys are grandmas, do you guys have a way of approaching it, or how are you guys gonna be a grandmother figure in your grandchildren's life?
Go ahead.
Wow.
I've never had this question.
Wow. I don't know. I hope to be as supportive as I possibly can to my daughters, to their kids, and sort of be in your face, not taking aging gracefully. How about that?
Good answer.
It's so important. I know for just my mother, of course, my grandmothers are, they're both still living actually, but
wow.
We just were there over Thanksgiving. We visited. But, even my mother was so much help to me with my children. Now she's in Arkansas and I'm in Chicago, but, it was just meant such a lot to me, and it still does. But she would work the night shift. She's a nurse. She would work all night, and then I would meet her getting off work, and she would take my daughter, who's my oldest, but she would take her so that I could go to classes. And that's the only reason I got a bachelor's degree. Was because my mom did that, and that was a huge sacrifice, and she had no sleep, and she still would do this for me. So because she really, really believed in me going and finishing school. So I had my first daughter halfway through my bachelor's program, and then it was way harder after that. That's when I started drinking caffeine for the first time, was after she was born, and I was trying to get through classes. But so, I would hopefully, if time permitting, I'm kind of teaching a lot right now, and I hope to not be a grandmother anytime soon. But time permitting, I would really like to give back, to any grandkids that I have. It's giving back to the grandkids. It's also giving back to your own kids. Still, it's still being the mom. It's still taking care of your own kids. So the way I look at it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So let's switch up a little bit, because I wanted to know the answer to this crazy question. So have you ever eaten undeveloped chicken eggs? This is my question. But the other question, because probably most people haven't, is one of those things where when I was writing this, I was always texting to my brother and my sister, my other brother and my mom, and, saying, did this really happen? Because these things are kind of crazy sounding. And they go, oh, yeah. And so some of the things that came back were like, I'm like, what else do you remember? And then, my brother texted, oh, those eggs that she would take out of the, and so it's like the same kind of things we remember because they're kind of so different.
What else did your brother remember eating?
Did he remember eating? Well, that was the one he remembered eating, but I would ask about lots of things. Like, is this how you remember it? Like, because it sounds really strange, and it sounds like not normal. Like, I'm writing this down and maybe I'm lying, and they'd be like, no,
that happened.
Totally happened that way. So, but he also mentioned it about this. And anyway, so I'm just wondering if you guys have eaten any kind of odd things. I usually don't, but in this case, I was a kid, so that was what was on the table, and I did eat these things, and they tasted like eggs, but they were just didn't have shells or anything, and she just took them out of the chicken's body and cooked them. But anyway, so what kind of strange things have you eaten, if anything?
I think the closest coming to the underdeveloped chicken eggs would be raw eggs. Freshman year of high school, I was pretty scrawny, so my dad was like, eat these will get you stronger. So I remember the first day of school, like, we woke up early, and he cracked the egg open,
oh my
put it in a glass, and that was the first time, and I just kind of like chugged it down, and it was such a different feeling because the yellow just gets stuck in your throat, and like half of it's in your throat and half of it's like slowly going down your stomach. So that was like a different experience. But after that, like, I mean, I continued eating them, but I would just like mix it in a shake and something similar to that. But then I found out that's not really too beneficial to you, so I stopped that really fast. But it's just that first time when you eat a raw egg, that feeling, I feel like no one can ever forget it. It's just the yolk just gets stuck right in your throat, and that's just a crazy feeling.
Do you eat oysters and things?
I've tried. Yeah, I mean, I've tried oysters, but I don't think that's like the same feeling. Yeah, definitely not.
Okay, I'm not planning to try either of those, oysters or the raw.
I mean, you've had these. I think. I mean, you've had you've basically had an unborn chicken, really. So I mean, I think I'm in a better shape than you are in that case.
Do you have any crazy food stories?
Well, I have some crazy food stories that are perhaps slightly different. I mean, perhaps I grew up eating things that other people wouldn't have eaten, because in my culture you would eat gefilte fish, which is kind of slimy and icky, and matzo balls and things like that. Here's the deal. My mother is a terrible cook. Okay, she is an awful cook. And she has always been an awful cook. And so you eat things that are perhaps culturally what you might be eating. But as I have grown up, I have her recipes. I have her handwritten recipes, which were from her mother, who was also a terrible cook. And actually her mother, because I have a cousin, it's actually my mother's first cousin, so it's his grandmother, the same grandmother, remembers how awful his grandmother was as a cook. So I come from a long line of really bad cooks. And I remember once at a family meal and my father saying, wow, these matzo balls are really, really good, because matzo balls are matzo meal and egg and oil, and you put them in the soup. It's like a dumpling, and either they fall apart and they're fluffy, or they sink to the bottom and are rock hard and are like eating golf balls, or they can be just right and they can float and they're great. And mine actually come out floaty and fluffy, but there's a reason that there are jokes against these, okay? Because they can come out really bad. And my mother's were always really bad. So my father says to the whole group, these are really good. Monica, you should give your mother the recipe.
Uh-oh.
And I said, and I still can't believe, I'm embarrassed that I said this in front of an entire table of family and friends. But Dad, this is Mom's recipe.
Oh, my God.
And my father goes, but how come your mother's never comes out this way? Oh, no. And so then my mother pipes up, and she never followed the recipe. She never followed the way to make it. And I go, I follow the recipe. So the family joke now, I must have done this maybe 10 years ago. I didn't filter myself. So the family joke is that I'm a good cook because I follow the recipe.
Oh, yeah, I don't have a very good filter myself, I have to say, but
So again, I make this. It's a gefilte means stuffed. It's a ground fish, and it comes out really good when I make it, and it comes out really awful when my mother makes it.
Oh, wow.
And that is why there are jokes about that kind of food, and. So,
speaking of seafood, growing up, I hated seafood. I hated the smell, just everything about seafood. I never ate it. And my family, they love seafood. They eat shrimp and every seafood there is, they try it. And growing up, they would always try to give me some. And I just hated it. And that built a hatred because my mom would try to sneak it in. She's like, oh, it's just chicken. But I knew it. That's fish. Mom, don't fool me. That's fish. Because I could tell by the smell of it. But she would always try. And one of the things my family always eats is shrimp. And to this day, I started eating I eat lobster now. I eat all the other seafoods, but shrimp, they would always try to sneak in my food, like noodles, rice, fried rice, anything it was. They try to sneak in shrimp. And that just built a hatred for me. So to this day, I can't eat shrimp because, I've tried it, but I just don't like the texture of it. And it just brings back all these memories.
Isn't that different in texture than lobster, though?
It really isn't, but it's just they used to try to
How about
force
if they told you? How if they told you that the shrimp was lobster? Could they fooled you?
They could have probably done that, but it took me a while to even start eating any sort of seafood. I started with a fish fillet from McDonald's, and then slowly worked my way up to more now I could eat calamari and all those things. I still can't eat fish eggs though, roe. I don't know how people do that either, but shrimp I can't. And especially if they're not properly cleaned, you could actually see the brown lining, and that's I can't do it. I can't.
Okay, so thank you for sharing your it's usually a good discussion. Okay, so the last thing to talk about is something that's talked about in society these days. But so we didn't have, really store-bought toys. Really didn't. You've seen photos, and my doll was not even really a doll, and it was just naked, and I don't know. But we didn't have normal toys. So we just made things up, and we would just make up games, and we would use, rocks and sticks and for baseball and things. So I'm just wondering if you have some memories of that, or what you think about kids these days, kind of a scenario. Are kids today not really enjoying the simple things in life because they don't have to? Basically, they have electronics and all these fancy store-bought toys and things.
Well, I'll say that as a parent, we tried to keep as many electronics away from our kids. And the things that my kids loved to play with were things like boxes. And they would get boxes, and they would color the boxes and make the boxes into trains and make the boxes into cars and make the boxes into all of these things. And it's not that my kids didn't have toys, because they did, but it was really important to us as parents of kids, young kids, to make sure that they stayed away from electronics as much as they possibly could. So we purposely, as parents, made sure that that happened. I don't know what my kids would do, and now they both, of course, have smartphones, but they're out of college.
So have you ever talked to them about, are they grateful in retrospect?
They have great memories.
Okay.
They have great memories of the dress-up box. As a matter of fact, we had old clothes in the dress-up box, and I was cleaning out the basement and wanted to get rid of, it's got this hideous prom dress that I made actually for myself. And it has garage sale shiny shoes and all these other kinds of things. And they got very upset. They did not want me to get rid of the dress-up box. They did not want me to get rid of those things.
Yeah,
Although I did get rid of the boxes.
You still had those?
I still had boxes that had, I don't know, cars drawn on them.
Aw.
Interesting. It's interesting that I'm from a completely different age group from you guys. Obviously, right. I'm only 21.
You're the same age as my younger daughter,
right? So I didn't grow up with an iPad in my hand. Nowadays, I see a lot of babies and kids they're better at using iPads and stuff than my mom, or something like that. But I grew up with cars and action figures and stuff like that, but I always found that to be just too boring by itself. So I would actually kind of build these contraptions with my toys where I would use string to have my action figures fly through the room and weird contraptions like that. Or I would take the long blinds and I would twist and turn them in different ways to make them a racetrack. So I kind of did stuff like that, but I didn't play with a bat and rocks and stuff like that. That's interesting that you found an alternative to to have fun where you guys just didn't stay at home and watch. I saw the picture of your little TV. You guys could have done that all day, but you guys found different routes to enjoy yourself, basically.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I also have super fond memories of growing up, and I don't feel like I lacked anything. I really don't. And so I don't know. My kids have all the gadgets. We try to limit it, but, we have passwords. Password. Everything in my house has password. But, they do have them. But that's what they want to do, and I don't like that aspect, because that's if it's a choice, go out. Sometimes they'll go play, but it's usually want to be stuck to the game, or stuck to the Kindle, stuck to.
It's really hard when all of your friends are kind of doing it, So if all your friends are at home on their iPads and stuff, you don't have friends to go out and play with. So it's just I feel like it's just a culture that's built now that kids would rather play on their video games or something at home, even though they're communicating with each other, instead of actually going out and doing the interesting things that you did while growing up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there was forced interesting things, but they were interesting things. Yeah, for sure. So Monica and Abdullah, thank you once again for joining us today. That's all the time we have right now, but please tune in next time to hear how Henry finally got potty trained. Until then, dream big and have fun.